um, looking at aggregate demand and the aggregate demand curve and what that is. And we can think of the aggregate demand curve really as the sum total of all demand curves for all products in an economy. Add them all up, and here's what we have. It's pretty much like that. It's not 100% like that, but it's close enough for our purposes. We can think also of aggregate demand as a measure of the willingness of consumers, well, not consumers, all actors in an economy to purchase output at all prices. That should say at all prices. So it's another way of saying, it's another way of expressing an economy's intention to spend. It's a reflection of spending. And so when we look at aggregate demand, we want to think of the different kinds of spending that go into aggregate demand. We have consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Now, the reason that we then look at four different kinds of spending and just say, instead of just saying spending is spending, why bother figuring out the different categories of spending, is that the reasons for spending are different. In other words, the motivations of consumers is different than the motivation of investment spenders, usually businesses, different than the motivations of governments. So it's important to know what it is that makes consumers want to spend more or less versus what it is that makes governments spend more or less. Also, when we want to try to manage macroeconomics, when we want to try to manage the demand curve, demand management is what we call it, we want to know how these behave so that we can then know what buttons to push in order to make changes. In any case, we look at the aggregate demand curve as shifting to the right or the left, depending upon whether or not people intend to spend more. So if conditions are such that spending is likely to increase, consumers are confident about the future, they're going to go out and spend more, we see that aggregate demand is likely to shift to the right. Consumers are less confident about the future, they're likely to spend less, then we see that aggregate demand would shift to the left. On the y-axis is average price level rather than just prices, but average price level. And on the x-axis is GDP, because it's a measurement of output, quantity. Remember, the GDP, gross domestic product, is a measurement of all the output in an economy in a given year. Everything's built, every service provided, everything that you spend money on, we call it GDP. So this is the concept of aggregate demand. And again, remember, we want to separate aggregate demand out into four different kinds of spending so that we can then figure out